May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. And so today we hear Jesus coming to his hometown, and they are offended. Have you ever been offended by somebody? Have you ever offended somebody? So Jesus is here offending people. But if you recall, several weeks ago when we were reading chapter 3, Jesus offended some other people. He offended the Pharisees. These were religious leaders known for strict adherence to the law and traditions. He obviously offended them. The Sadducees, he offended them. They were priestly aristocrats. This was the elite of the society. And then he offended the scribes, the experts in Jewish law. And then the Herodians. So now when he's offended the Herodians, he's offended both the right and the left. All the elite. Offended by Jesus. And then he comes to his hometown. Now, Nazareth was a nowhereville. It was a nothing. These were the hoi polloi, the large number of people, but they were all poor. They had no power. They were not the elite, but even they were offended. So, what do you think? Jesus offends everybody. Jesus is an offensive person. This is not Jesus' gentle, meek, and mild. Jesus did not get crucified for being gentle, meek, and mild. Jesus was crucified because he offended people. Now, what does that mean to offend people? This visceral rejection and hostility. And if you follow Jesus, you really follow Jesus, you will offend people too. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus and you've never offended anybody because of it, then, I don't know, you not do it. Are you a little afraid? Are you concerned that they might reject you? Because what Jesus says is he calls out to people about what they're doing that will not allow them to live a thriving life. It will limit their possibilities. Now, it's beyond dispute that in the ministry of 2 or 3 years, Jesus of Nazareth attracted and infuriated his contemporaries. He mesmerized and alienated the ancient world. He unleashed a movement that's been done the same ever since. Now, think about what this is. Jesus, in this scripture and in Mark, we learn that Jesus is offensive. And we're also going to learn why he is offensive. And then it tells us how we can be selectively offensive as well. Now, when we think of Jesus, are there places that we are uncomfortable with Jesus? Does he offend us in some ways? Now, think for a moment. Think for, typical Los Angelino. Yes, Jesus is, he's a great teacher. A great teacher. He was a good ethical person and held us up to, it gave us good ethical principles to live by. But to say then Jesus is the Son of God and Jesus is the unique way to God. Oh, wait a minute! No, I can't go there. Have you ever had that experience? Yes, Jesus is a good person, a good model, but there's lots of ways to get to God. And of course, there's lots of ways of salvation. And different things are true for different people. What did Jesus say? What does the gospel say? This is the way, the truth, and the life. Now, as Episcopalians, are we offended by that? Are we comfortable with declaring that? And how do we do that? Are we offended by parts of Jesus? Now think for a moment. Think about the places that distinguish us from other denominations. Roman Catholics. Are there places that we are offended by what they believe Jesus left them with? Are we offended by their belief that the Pope is always right? Are people offended by our sacramental world, our prayer book, written prayers? Are we offended by the people who believe that standing on the boardwalk in Laguna Beach, preaching and saying to people, you must believe in Jesus? Are we offended by that? Jesus was offensive. Now, think for a moment. Let's put this in context. You who have had children or grandchildren, did you ever offend your children when they were doing something you saw wrong, or something you saw putting themselves in danger? And as they grew into those teenage years, were you aware that you have offended them? And you did it out of love. Is it possible that when we follow the great commandment of Jesus to love each other as he has loved us, is it possible that when we really live that out and we're really looking for somebody's best interest to support them, is it possible that we offend them? I don't think Jesus offended anybody because he wanted to be offensive. I think his life here was one of a manifest model of love in a world that doesn't live by love. In a world that sees itself as the way to success is through power and money and celebrity, and regardless of anything else. And if you saw that in your children, out of love, would you tell them about that? Do you have the courage to tell them? Are you willing to be offensive and to be told you're offensive? Can we do that amongst ourselves? Can we, out of love, be offensive? Or will we just sit back and say, well, who am I to share this with them? They might be offended by it, and it's far better that I be just gentle, meek, and mild. And outside of this congregation, what about the world? Where do we, as followers of Jesus, see people who aren't loving, who aren't caring for each other, who are caring only for themselves, and if they have enough power, they have hurt others in many, many ways? Do we have the courage to be offensive in the way that Jesus was offensive? Now, Jesus recognized that in your hometown, you're probably not going to have a lot of power. People are going to see through you. In fact, they were so offended by him that did you pick up on what they called him? What they called his mother? They said, who is this? Just a carpenter. Just a worker. Where does he get all this wisdom? And who is this? Isn't this Jesus, the son of Mary? Now think for a moment. Remember, this is a patrilineal society. No one was ever named as the son of a woman. It's always the son of a man, unless there was no man in the picture. And with brothers and sisters, was this gossipy little city of Nazareth, what were they saying about Mary? Jesus so offended them that they were willing to call him out in ways that we wouldn't do today. Now, having experienced this, Jesus didn't just roll up in a ball and suck his thumb and say, wow, all these people I've offended, I guess maybe I better sit and pray and just become a quiet monk. He left, went around villages and began to heal, and then he asked his 12 disciples to do what they were being prepared to do all the way through. And he said to them, you're going to go out 2 by 2, which was a standard way in biblical times for people to go out, especially if they were sharing messages with people. To go out 2 by 2. He said, now, we're not going out 2 by 2 with a lot of money. In fact, you'll have no money. We're not going out 2 by 2 with 2 suits of clothing. In fact, you'll only have 1 tunic, not 2. He said, all you'll have is a staff. And he said, you'll go out and you will go to a village. And if they receive you and give you a place, then stay in that place. Don't seek a better, don't seek something different. Stay in that place until you live. And he said, there will be times when people are offended by you. And if that's the case, after you sent the message, after you preached, after you commented on what's going on, if they are offended, simply dust off the shoes off your sandals, which is a way of saying, I've given you my message, it's now up to you. And leave. Now, I think of so many Christian, you call them saints, but so many committed Christians who have offended people because of their love for them. I happen to live with one. She is so offensive to homeless folks who don't follow through on what they say they're going to do, who promise to do something and they don't do it, to drug addicts, felons who have come out of jail and feel bad about themselves. She offends them with her love. And out of that, changes happen. Not always, but sometimes. I think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who offended Hitler and his entourage so terribly that they eventually killed him. But he had the courage to, out of love for them and for all of Germany and the rest of the world, to declare what they were doing was wrong. That's what Christians do who follow Jesus. We offend people out of our love for them. Now, this is not about going about just being offensive for being offensive. That's not Jesus. That's not what we're talking about. It's seeing that the love that Jesus brings, the command to love each other as I have loved you, takes courage, and sometimes we offend in doing that. Not by mistake, but because of what we do. And that's where those 2 by 2 went out and learned that they could heal people. They could make relationships better. They could help people to rise when they had been crippled. They could help people speak when they were dumb and silent. That they could give people the courage to stand on their own. Jesus asked us to follow him as one of those members of the 2 by 2. To go out in the world not because we are great, not because we of our own have a great message, not because we have money, but because we don't. Because he sends us out to heal the world that we find ourselves in by the loving presence and the courage to call people out when they are doing things that hurt others and themselves. Jesus and his love is the way, the truth, and the life. That's what it means to be offensive to the world. And that's what we are called to be. Thanks be to God.